Greetings! Welcome to the Week 9 Early Access Update for Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades. We're going to start off, as always, with a sound check. Make sure your speakers aren't up too high. Wonderful. So, we've got a slightly smaller update for you this week, as I have been sick as a dog for basically from Saturday up until about yesterday morning. I'm still feeling pretty under the weather. But we do still have a few new toys for you. The first of which is as was asked for several times, a high-capacity magazine for the G22, especially now that we've got a full auto version of it. So let's spawn lock that. Take aim. You can see it fires pretty fast and shoots pretty high if you just hold the trigger down. Let's just cycle a whole mag through it all at once. Let's reset our target. About as well as we could expect. We've also got one new submachine gun, the Mp5k. I was able to slip this one in this week as I had gotten it about 80% done the other week and just hadn't quite finished it. So I pushed it over the finish line. Its mags are interchangeable with the regular Mp5. Let's rock that over to full auto. Awesome. So yeah, so give that a play with. And then lastly, in terms of the new additions, a bunch of new items have been added to the item spawner. So we've got the various sights for the M4, so you can now use these in the breaching scene. In the explosives category, we now actually have a way to light the dynamite in the form of the Flipso and our Patriot Strike Anywhere matches. And we've got a section for horseshoes, which have actually added some posts and some horseshoes over to the Arizona range, if you'd like to play with them out in the sunlight. And a miscellaneous category that's going to grow and just have all sorts of random things in it eventually, and for now just has the tippy toys in it. So, and those should all be available in all scenes. The one restriction is that explosives can't be spawned in the modular range, as they would mess up the way the scoring functions with the various targets. So yeah, I also wanted to mention that I made a change in the Gunnasium for now, as I've heard back from a number of you that you've had enough trouble with calibrating your floor height that crawling through this section here is a little difficult. So what I've done is I've moved the hand buzzers off the ground to a low spot on the wall there, and I've added an alternate route where instead of, say, crawling along here, you can take a set of handholds across the ceiling. So hopefully that should help out those of you either with floor height problems or with just too limited of a tracked range, such that crawling along the ground is just a bit too glitchy for you. So yeah.
Hey. So beyond that, I was able to sneak in a couple more bug fixes across the board. It was about all I had the cognitive capacity to deal with this past week. The filtering for two-handed weapons has been tweaked to be a little more responsive. I don't know if it's a little too jittery now when using the scope on the M4, but give it a shot and let me know. I especially noticed after actually watching someone else play the game that the foregrip was lagging behind the front hand way more than I realized it had been playing myself, and so that's been tightened up a bunch. Let's see, I've added some haptic buzz to the alternate hand when you're firing two-handed, which should help, make you feel the guns a bit more. Let's see here. Oh, in the Gunnasium, it's a little thing, but a bunch of people complained about not being able to see at a distance whether or not they had hit a hand buzzer. So I've changed the color that the buzzer changes to once you've pressed it. So let me know if it's still just as too difficult to see at a distance. Bunch of other little silly bug fixes. The G22 Auto no longer fires when you pick it up. You actually have to release the trigger and then pull it again for it to be able to fire, and a bunch of bugs involving alt-holding weapons and dropping them into quickbelt slots should be fixed now. If anyone continues to run into any strange problems in that regard, please let me know. I think I have it ironed out, but I'm still in a bit of a brain fog. So beyond the update, I've realized, especially as the number of YouTube comments continues to grow and it becomes harder for me to sort of follow up to everyone, that there's a number of common questions that keep getting asked. And so I figured I would do a little short Q&A with some of the most common ones that I've scraped out. Question number 1, will H3 eventually be coming to Oculus Rift and Touch? I get asked this a lot. My answer is that hopefully, but that's still to be determined. Oculus, from everything that I've been hearing from folk, has been asking devs to privilege a 2 cameras in front of you setup for their games, whereas a number of the scenes that I've been building have really been built around free rotation on the y-axis. And now that doesn't mean that there aren't solutions to be able to handle that, whether it's sort of adding a toggle button of some kind to allow you to rotate yourself, or some other sort of clever solution. I just don't want to necessarily make a commitment that 100% of the content in the form that H3 is in will be able to be cleanly ported over in a way that's enjoyable and represents the content well. But it is something that I'm perpetually investigating. I've been following the SDK updates and paying close attention to the other stuff that people have been making with Touch. So that's just something that as it gets closer to them eventually announcing a pre-order date, that I'll be able to give a more solid answer on. Will H3 be coming to PSVR? No. This one I can pretty much guarantee, especially unless this new version of the PS4 that has been rumored ends up being tremendously more powerful. I can't imagine it. A lot of the scenes in H3 just barely hit frame times on a 970. So unless as I said, the new PS4 manages to crest past that significantly, it's pretty unlikely. So this one I get super frequently, and it's not even typically in the form of a question. It's just are you going to add X gun or X type of gun? Typically, it's just in the form of add World War II guns or something like that. So I know you guys are excited, but I wanted to explain a little bit of the logic about how I'm choosing firearms and the process that I intend to use moving forward. One thing right out of the gate is that I do intend to have at least one, hopefully more, of every different sort of quintessential class of firearm. As the thing that really got me started with this project was being interested in the types of interactions in various classes of firearms. So it's definitely going to be a bolt action. I'm going to try to make a belt-fed weapon work. That one I'm a little worried about because joint chains in physics are just terrible and they like to explode, so I may have to come up with a sort of hybrid semi-can, semi-physics enabled solution for that. Time will tell. There's definitely going to be some ordnance. I want to do an RPG-7. I want to do field mortars. And I want to do some ridiculous stuff as well. I'd love to be able to actually do some sci-fi weapons that still are designed and function on, how to put it, plausible principles. So not necessarily just like a laser gun with a button, but something that sort of is halfway in between a realistic firearm that has imperfections and has different sorts of latches and levers that need to be pulled, while still having some more fantastical properties. But that'll probably be, months down the line. As to whether I'm going to add your specific favorite gun, maybe not. I'm prioritizing the stuff that I have easy access to, and by that I mean have access to a model that I can license and then adapt, that's already, say, 80 to 90% where I need it to be. I've mentioned this before on Reddit, that basically none of the firearm models that you can find online right now are VR ready. And what I mean by that is that because of the fact that most high quality firearm models are designed for regular first person shooter games, they assume that they're going to be in the sort of front right quadrant of the screen. and that we're never really going to see the right side of the firearm. We're never going to be pulling it up here and looking into the bolt assembly. We're never going to be turning it upside down and looking up into the magazine well. And so almost every firearm model that I've purchased has had either filled off geo, or it's just missing components, or other sorts of things where it looks perfectly fine before you move any of the pieces. But when you start actually moving the pieces, you realize how incomplete the model is. And so a lot of the work that I've done has been sort of buying a model and seeing if I can, do surgery on it to get it close enough. I mean, the interiors are not realistic on any of the guns in H3, but my goal is always to make them look not ridiculous in their sort of common operation. I get asked a lot whether we're going to add multiplayer. This is a solid nope. There might be some limited mode where I end up playing around with networking, maybe the lawn games, because they're simple enough and they involve just like having a couple objects. But right at the beginning of this project, the way that I've constructed the weapon and interaction and physics systems privilege physics complexity and that sort of simulatory focus. And trying to sync that over a network is somewhere in between nightmarish and impossible. A number of people have said, like, oh, don't sync that stuff, just sync player position and let people shoot each other. And the fact of the matter is, I think that that's the least interesting thing you could possibly make occur multiplayer. I would only do it if all of the nuance that makes the game special, like being able to take a mag out of your quickbelt and toss it over to a friend, could work. But in the way that everything is just coded and based around what we're good at as a team, it's so far outside of the scope of what we could or would tackle right now. So that's just not going to happen. Please stop asking for it. Folks keep asking about an in-game tutorial. I know it's missing. I know just being like, hey, go look at the YouTube video is a pain in the butt. But it's one of those things that while controls, while content, and while exactly how a lot of the weapons function are changing to invest in tutorial production, which is very labor intensive. It's a lot of UI, it's a lot of sort of sequencing and state checking, especially if you want to make an interactive tutorial where, say, an object in your hand is instructing you to do something. That can oftentimes take just as long to code, design, QA, and test as making the object itself, if not more. And so that's something that we intend to add, but I definitely don't want to add prematurely. Because if we do so and then something changes, we have to not only go back and change the object, but change the way all of its tutorial content works. So what this means is that as I move forward, every time I add something significantly new that would need instruction, I'm just going to update the tutorial video on my channel and pin it on Reddit and pin it on the Steam community. And once again, once everything sort of solidifies more months down the road, I really want to work on a robust in-game tutorial system. So yeah. And then beyond the FAQ stuff, I wanted to talk a little bit about the scenes that are in the game right now and what I'm thinking in terms of how they're going to be continued to be developed. So starting with the sandbox ranges, the indoor range is going to get essentially a full reskin at some point. That was a scene that I built in about a day and a half, and so it's pretty sparse on the fine details. I like the layout of it. I'm going to largely keep the layout, but I'm definitely going to rebuild it to allow so that, there's actually a side door and we can sort of peer through it and see like the gun shop or whatever that the range is attached to. Fill things out with some signage, probably put some incidental props in, maybe even a broom to be able to sweep away, cartridge casings. At some point I will actually add a global option for you too. If you don't want cartridges to be automatically destroyed, that will eventually be added. I'm going to add some extra targets for you to be able to shoot. I thought about doing user-generated content, but for now, at the very least, I've decided against it. Because truthfully, I don't want people putting up video of them putting up pictures of people they don't like in the game and shooting their face off. Just because it just turns the game into a vehicle for people to, to express their violent feelings towards other. And it's perfectly fine if you do that on your own time, at a real range, whatever floats your boat, but it's just not something I want the game being used for. So it's not something I'm going to build in as a feature for now, despite requests. The warehouse range, this is a scene that in general I'm probably not going to continue working on because I want to sunset it at some point. It continues to have performance issues, and I think that partially has to do with the fact that I used a Unity terrain, which have always been the most bizarrely inefficient elements of the Unity engine. I don't understand why a simple terrain patch takes such a high draw cost in VR, but regardless, it's going to eventually be replaced by a scene that has all of its same functionality, which is to have a whole bunch of targets at various ranges that are just fun to plink at. I know a bunch of you gun folk have been like, hey, can you make a range like Hickok 45s? And I totally want to. Seriously, the first video of his that I watched, I immediately was like, I gotta figure out a way to make an environment like this. Now, the challenging part of that is that an outdoor scene like that, to look convincing and have that same woodsy, out plinking feel to it, needs a lot of trees, but also needs to run fast because it's in VR. So that's something that I'm definitely not going to rush, and I've been looking at various sorts of foliage assets and figuring out ways to get the look and feel of this sort of distance in the environment without having it be frame rate crushing. But that's essentially that sort of an outdoor range like that's sort of short to mid-far range with a variety of targets is what's going to eventually replace the warehouse. But it's something that I'm going to probably build slowly instead of throwing a prototype out first, because I need to manage it performance-wise very carefully. And then the Arizona range, which, I threw in some horseshoes. I think this scene is going to continue to be a sort of grab bag of fun things to plink at. A couple folk have suggested doing something like a sort of Old West shooting gallery. I actually have a bunch of Wild West assets I used on a past project that I've been considering pulling out and doing something like a sort of a life-size shooting gallery with various sorts of animated targets that respond. Just something sort of fun and buoyant, no high scores or anything like that, but just, sort of goofy things that have various animated effects when you shoot them. And that's probably something I'll end up doing, sometime over the next couple months, maybe progressively. Might be something that, every week I throw in another object or two into. We'll see. As for the modular range, I definitely want to add more modes and target types, but I realized when reviewing it that I've coded myself into a bit of a corner. I didn't make the sort of sequencing system about as modular as I wanted it to be, in part because I didn't design it out on paper ahead of time well enough. So this is one of those things I'm probably going to leave the modular range alone completely for a week or two while I work out a new sort of code framework design on paper to make that just a more mutable process, because I want to continue to develop that scene as a really high score competition oriented sort of police trainer arcade style thing. So there's going to be more target variety, and there's going to be more types of challenges, count up, countdowns, color matching, that sort of thing. But I need to just program it better, because the first version of it I did late at night, fairly rushed, so I need to stop doing that. The breaching scene, which is eventually going to be named the Grill House, is going to proceed in several stages. The first of which is that I'm not gonna continue futzing with the scene content for now. The next thing I'm gonna do is re-implement a sort of fast teleporting schema. I'm going to explain it more next week. Hopefully this coming week I'll actually be able to get it working. It's the next big thing that I really want to focus on is having a dedicated button on the controller for being able to do a teleport, and instead of having it aim at a specific spot, it will essentially pick the closest teleport node within a given sort of field of view that you're aiming. So it's something that you should be able to have a weapon up two-handed and be able to just aim generally in an area and click the teleport button, and you'll warp to the next. Almost think of them like waypoints. As I really want whatever sort of movement system ends up being the core in the sort of breaching gameplay. I want it to be fast, and I want it to be something that can be executed on a reflex, so that you don't even have to be looking exactly where you're going to be teleporting. If you just remember there's a waypoint to the right of where you're standing, you should be able to just pop the controller in that direction and warp to it. Because eventually, in sort of phase 2 of working on it, there's going to be enemies that fire back at you. This is the mode that is going to be taking place in. So I've got some designs in my sketchbook for some cool turrets with sort of steel plates that you have to knock down to disable the turret. Still deciding on exactly what they're going to be firing at you. There might be several modes, either where they fire full speed rounds at you, where if you just get caught out, you can sort of immediately lose, as well as some slower projectiles, like say tennis balls, for people who want to play it on an easier mode. So yeah, and then the third phase for the sort of breaching gameplay, and this is down the road. I don't know how long this will take or exactly how fleshed out it will be, but this is the part of H3 that I really want to engage user-generated content. So in an ideal world, what I would like is to be able to make the breaching scenes be user-creatable, where you can pull out walls, you can pull out targets, possibly sequence some simple events together right in the scene in VR, and then be able to save them out and share them. As I think that's the sort of thing that it makes sense to get the community involved in coming up with cool challenges for. Building a system for that's robust and bug-free and etc. is not easy, and truth be told, I've never built something like that before for other people to use and try to create level content. But it's my ultimate goal for this part of the gameplay. So yeah. And then lastly, the Gunnasium. I've been blown away at the response to it. I know it does make some of you nauseous, and I'm really sorry. But it does seem that from just my informal polling, about 9 out of 10 people seem to be able to enjoy it, even if it still is sort of perceptually intense. So my plans with the Gunnasium is what I'd like to do is try doing some shorter sort of obstacle course type blocks for it, that are maybe sort of focused around, say, mostly sort of ceiling work. Have some ones I want to try to get crawling working better, because I don't think it feels right at the moment. But the original inspiration for that was actually having an obstacle course moment where you're like crawling under barbed wire with a rifle kind of thing, and I still want to try to get that to work right. I know a lot of folk have trouble with it because of their floor height calibration, so I'm probably not going to do that until I actually have a global option that allows you to override your floor height to make that a little bit easier. So yeah, so those are the main scenes and where I'm going on them. You know, I'm still very much following what's the most sensible thing to work on each week, you know, following my inspiration. I know it probably comes across as a little, you know, scattered or confusing to some of you in terms of how I prioritize things. But yeah, at the moment, it's because of the fact that this is such a passion project, I tend to get fixated on new ideas or just have to try out a new thing. But obviously that will continue to occur in parallel with just sort of working the canvas and getting the scenes that do exist and the game modes that do exist further refined and throwing out new experiments for y'all to try. So hope you're enjoying things, and now that I'm mostly feeling better, we should have a more full-fledged update for you next week. See ya.